can't move this here. What do I do to move this? Oh.
I think it should. I just wasn't.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay, so basically after about 3 decades of research in AI, I retired a decade ago, moved to New York City, and put AI out of my mind, and spent my time catching up on novels. The best novel during that period is Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. Has anybody read it? You have, yeah. You like it?
Well, yes, it's one of the best.
Okay, all right. So, but ChatGPT, released in 2022, startled me. Like Kant, after reading Hume, I woke up from my dogmatic slumbers. It was doing things that I didn't think it was possible for a connectionist system to do. Not perfectly, but more capably than one might have thought. Many people inside generative AI were also surprised, I heard. I had been, before that, in the mid-80s, I had been in the thick of connectionism versus symbolic AI wars. I don't know, many of you may not, wouldn't have been active at that time, but there were a lot of conferences. Connectionism was raised a challenge, and I was firmly on the symbolic side. Ashok and I actually wrote a paper critiquing some of the claims of the connectionist side. I used to give talks entitled "How to Protect Your Children from Connectionism." So I'm just laying my cards on the table here. That Fodor was a big philosopher, cognitive scientist, had argued convincingly, I thought, like many people, that connectionism could not possibly handle the systematicity and compositionality properties of natural language. But as it happens, LLMs do things. The LLMs handle both comprehension and generation without explicit representation of grammar or semantics. This achievement seems to have produced a crisis in computational linguistics. For example, there was an article in Quanta magazine when ChatGPT broke an entire field, an oral history. It really was a critical, that's a crisis in the field. And also, long-time critics of Chomskyanism in theoretical linguistics, the success of these generative things have emboldened them. Pianta Dosi from Berkeley wrote a paper which caused quite a bit of stir. Modern language models refute Chomsky's approach to language. It argues against innateness because there is no internal structure. It just learned from not even, I mean, just little tokens. LLMs discover implicit theories of grammar and semantics, he claimed, just like people do from examples. They also, instead of having syntax and semantics separately, the thing integrates semantics and syntax into one thing. Now, it turns out, though, not so fast. Learning from 1 trillion sentences may not need innate structure, but human children are more limited in their exposure to the number of the amount of text or the amount of linguistic examples they hear. So the matter is by no means settled by LLMs. But it does things: summarization, imitating styles, intelligent collation of disparate and distributed information in response to queries, problem solving, planning. They all do them somewhat, some of them better than some. You know, it's still not something that you can say it's doing nothing. It's just still an impressive piece of software. Actually, it wrote a charming sonnet on my behalf to my wife for Valentine's Day. But of course, there are also problems with LLMs. Here's a well-known litany, so-called hallucinations. I actually call them just straight mistakes, falsehood. Hallucinations give the impression of disturbed but charmingly interesting humans. It struggles with logic problems. It solves one instance of a complex reasoning problem for a benchmark, and then failed badly in another instance the next day. Even in language understanding, they sometimes fail in interesting ways when dealing with entailments and presuppositions. So Chomsky and Fodor may still have the last word at this point. LLMs may enhance the productivity and hence the functional intelligence of an intelligent critical user, but it actually a very good chance of reducing the intelligence of a not very smart user because he cannot critique the product of an LLM. They're unreliably useful, if such a term can be created. Now, my interest when I think one of the things that interested me about LLMs is that it started talking to me, they're saying something about cognition. It's not simply a piece of artifact, but I felt like it was saying something interesting. But caveats, LLMs are clearly not, and are not intended to be by the designers, a model of an individual human cognition. LLM knowledge is not acquired by physical or perceptual interactions with the world, not from curious interactions or goal-driven behavior, but from many human second or third-hand knowledge. And again, what I'm going to say with respect to what I got out of them is they're not results. They're not scientific results. They are certain aha moments that I had. The only reason why you might be interested in them is that I've been thinking about and working on cognition for many years. If you agree with all of them, something went wrong somewhere. Okay, so earlier somebody talked about Kahneman systems 1 and 2. Just quickly, Daniel Kahneman is a well-known psychologist. He is also an economics Nobelist, proposed a bipartite division of the human cognitive system. I thought it would be an irony that an LLM might appreciate if I use an LLM in the preparation of my critique of LLMs. So I asked Gemini to summarize things for me. So it said system 1 is fast, automatic, and intuitive, relying on gut feelings and mental shortcuts for quick judgments. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and logical, requiring conscious effort and attention to analyze a situation before making a decision. In the humans, when you think of S1, they're kind of 300 milliseconds response time when something happens very quickly. While system 1 handles the vast majority of our thinking for efficiency, system 2 is activated to override system 1's potentially biased or incorrect conclusions in more complex situations. So for me, LLMs are potential sources of insight about the system 1 part. Role of S1 in real-time language comprehension and generation requires some additional attention, which I'm not going to do today because it kind of complicates the issue, but most of what I say will still be relevant, even without paying a lot of attention to how language works in the context of system 1. So LLMs in system 1. LLMs are not an exact match to system 1. In response to your prompt, they produce a continuous stream. Each part of it might be produced by a human S1. Their output is a stream of S1 responses without interaction with S2, as might happen in a human. In other words, typically in human, it's that we have a quick response from our intuition, I guess, and then our S2 steps in, critiques it, elaborates it, creates a sub-goal, which then might, again, S1 might propose more ideas. Whereas in LL1, they're just sequence of things that are happening. They also try to do, this is another thing, they also try to do by this behavior what S2 is often required to do in humans, complex planning, for example. Again, human S1s correspond to an individual, but LLMs model a certain subset of knowledge of the entire human society. So we're not, again, trying to model, LLMs are not a model of individual human. Research also actually turns out there's some psychologists are doing research on building an LLM based on what a human child receives as input, so over time. This would actually be a test to see if some innate structures are going to be called for if LLMs cannot reproduce that behavior. that would be evidence that the innate structures may be more necessary than one might think. Actually, for the record, LLM designers obviously don't think that they need an S2 component. They think they can just scaling will alone do it. Okay, I think they're wrong, but this is we'll have to wait. So now, if I don't know how many people have actually sort of examined or read about the LLM layers. LLMs have many, many, many layers. Okay, the lower layers represent items closer to language, but as you go higher, they seem to represent language-independent underlying concepts. For example, yesterday, Ernie Davis mentioned imitating patterns of language use. But that's true, but actually in the process of doing that, they internally build language-independent complex concepts. Another thing, most LLMs process text in multiple languages. So lower layers deal with fragments of multiple language unlabeled. But higher levels are building concepts which are independent of language, so that a piece of a concept might actually have come from German, or another from Chinese text. So in that way, the complex concepts that are language independent are built in higher levels. So now there's been a lot of discussion about what's a symbol. I take symbol to be the locus for controlling behaviors associated with an idea or a concept. For example, the symbol for Apple in our symbol system would have connections to other behaviors like properties and other ideas, like what do you do, what kind of nutrition it has. So it's now the power of symbols is that they help you localize and connect to related things, but in a very controllable way. The concepts this is maybe controversial, but the concepts that I just talked about in the intermediate layers in LLMs, I call them functionally symbolic in the sense that, but in a soft way, they are distributed. One can think of them as distributed soft symbols denoting the ideas. The concepts in LLMs correspond to activations, very similar to neural activations of evoked concepts when an agent is involved in some thought. In fact, there is ongoing experiments in many psychology labs in which they're actually taking LLMs and instrumenting them and studying which nodes fire, what concepts correspond to what inputs. Very similar to neuroscientists study the neural responses. So it's an amazingly similar kind of things are going on. And in fact, the insight about concept I just mentioned came from research of that type. Because they're soft, LLM concepts capture what philosophers call open texture concepts. These are the concepts in which there is no hard dividing line between what counts and what doesn't count. Some used to be called in computer science, some people call them fuzzy concepts. But I think open texture concept is a much better, much more useful term. Those without hard borders, unlike concepts denoted by digital symbol. As far as I know, such soft symbols cannot fully reproduce the behavior of symbols when quantification and other things are involved. Though there is a theorem in the connectionist literature that a 3-layer connectionist network can approximate any computable function. So there is this question of can you get away with these kinds of soft symbols to do everything that is needed to do? And that is something that is still unclear. So now it's going to come to something which interested me. In this framework, thinking is conceptual associations creating activations. Instead of inference, as in symbolic system that we are familiar with, concepts activate other concepts in a statistically associated way. This is suggestive of how pre-linguistic thinking in children or even animal thinking might take place. Often we wonder, what is going on in children before they acquire language? I mean, there is a period in which you can see them thinking, considering, selecting, rejecting, but it is not yet expressed in language. This way in which the LLM's higher layers are activating concepts is suggestive to me about a form of pre-linguistic thinking. In linguistically competent humans, the associations, when they flow downward, appear as thinking in language. In other words, when we think in language. It is very possible that what is going on is that, in fact, these conceptual associations are taking place higher level, but we are aware of them in language because that is how we relate to our mind. But the thoughts experienced in language are mostly mirroring non-linguistic conceptual activational activity in higher layers. Experiencing the thought in natural language is not an epiphenomenon because it is functionally useful for communication and also for elaboration in deliberation. So it's not simply an epiphenomenon, but it is still not. It's still happening at a somewhat higher, more abstract level. This also explains multilinguality, a translation capacity, etc. Thinking takes place in concept. Thoughts are mirrored in selected language. So I don't know if it's clear, but the idea that what is common in the head of a German and the head of a Chinese person and the head of an English-speaking person, and the same thought is thought. Something like that might be going on. Now, contrast this with the language of thought hypothesis, or mentalese. In the language of thought hypothesis sort of held that the predicate logic-like language is the substrate of thinking in a way independent of natural language, because that language is common to whether it's German or Chinese or English, explaining what is common between, and when they're thinking the same thought. I claim instead that what is common between a German, an American, or a Chinese person, a pre-linguistic child, and a higher animal is the capacity to hold concepts and let them activate other concepts. An activation pattern corresponds to a thought. Of course, language provides richer, more nuanced concept, but having concept activations, having thought, is independent of having language. A thought in an essay, so far I've been talking about S1, an agent's S1 traffics in concepts, but the agent mistakes for thinking in language because that is how she experiences it. An LLM, to me, shows how this might work. Now, how many people here know of knowledge level? These are senior people. I've been talking to some of the younger people. It's not something that seems to be currently taught in AI courses. So Newell was faced with this problem of trying to talk about a black information system independent of how it is implemented. There must be something that we can talk about. Think of it as whether it's a child or another person or even a computer system. We can ask 3 questions about it. What knowledge does it have? Does it know X? If achieving a goal requires using knowledge K, can knowledge be accessed? There are systems in our own head. For example, our visual system knows things that our cognitive system cannot access. It's only available to the visual system. Okay, so there's always this question about the system might have knowledge K, but it is localized in a way that it is not available for other goals that the cognitive system might face. Third question is, if K is available, what additional information can be gotten from K in the pursuit of the goal? For example, if it only is a statistical connection, that's a smaller amount of information you get from it, then you can use full-fledged logical reasoning involving it. This is knowledge use. And Newell proposed that an ideal agent will apply the principle of rationality. Namely that if the agent is pursuing a goal, and if a piece of knowledge K is relevant, in the agent that not only should the knowledge K be available, but the agent will derive the appropriate information from the piece of knowledge K to apply to goal G. For example, if a cat keeps going into a room, the owner might explain the behavior by saying, oh, he thinks the litter box is in the room. If you believed that, and if you had to go, wouldn't you go into the room? So the idea is that nobody is actually proposing that the cat has an internal predicate calculus expression, right? But it is still a way of talking about a black box agent in order to make sense of its behavior. So continuing now the thinking in LLM, the downside of view the LLM, if you view an LLM at the knowledge level, knowledge use is very suboptimal in an LLM compared to Newell's ideal agent. Why? Because only statistical associations are used instead of all the logical inferences you can make from the same piece of knowledge. At the knowledge level, the probability of finding the relevant knowledge in the LLM for a goal may be much less than 1, but then that is true of all systems. You can never guarantee that a knowledge level system will always access the knowledge. But because it is found in the set of association, but there is no repeated search for it, it might be happening in a deliberative agent. Another thing is access to distal knowledge may be statistically uncommon, but it may be very useful for a particular goal. And system one, like S1-like system, or an LLM system, will not be able to find it because it is not statistically that commonly associated with the goal. Contrast that with an architecture like SOAR. Knowledge use is also suboptimal compared to an ideal knowledge level agent. Instead of inference, only statistical association is used. In fact, a lot of the so-called hallucinations are due to that behavior by LLMs. It's fast because it supports distributed parallelism, but error prone. Contrast that with an architecture like SOAR again, which is serial and inference based. Now, okay, so I'm going to, another idea that has always been interesting to me is that in AI, for a long time, we have had this model of knowledge representation. There's somehow this idea that our head, we have a whole collection of knowledge represented in some symbolic form, and then when you have a goal, we retrieve that piece of knowledge from our head. That's always seemed to me somewhat implausible. It's called encodingism, that every piece of knowledge that we have is represented as an explicit piece of knowledge. And psych subscribe to the notion. The alternative view is that there's knowledge at the knowledge level. Maybe it's part of it is in the body, part of it is in our perceptual system, and non-linguistic concepts. For example, Clancy, in an early paper, he talks about situation-specific model construction from implicit knowledge. So in a way, from a non-symbolic substrate, agent construct knowledge in a form that deliberation can use for the specific goal at hand. So LLMs indicate to me how such a process might work from a distributed analog memory. When a proposition appears on the screen in an LLM or in the mind of a cognitive agent, what appears as a piece of knowledge is not retrieved, but actually constructed in response to the goal. The relevant knowledge might have originated from multiple sources. Another example is the diagrammatic representation. Diagrammatic representations are not an LLM representation. They are not a symbolic representation in the traditional sense, but they're very useful. You can actually construct propositional knowledge from them as needed. So I'm going to skip the common sense knowledge part because it's very complicated. So I'll go to the point is LLMs do contain a certain amount of and a certain kind of common sense knowledge because it's not its own it didn't construct the common sense knowledge that it has from its own body. It doesn't have a body. It doesn't have a perceptual system. But it's almost like the common sense knowledge as reflected in language over multiple sources. and it has its strengths and weaknesses. I have asked LLM questions like what happens to the posture of the human bodies when they're climbing a hill with a load on their back, and many other questions. And it has been surprisingly answering them reasonably well, but without any indication that it has very general common sense knowledge across the board. Also, this is psychologists, again, have done research. LLMs display other properties of human cognition, such as priming effects, and many other things that you expect that we know that human cognitive system has. Now, this is that the fully exploiting knowledge in an LLM requires a collaborating deliberative architecture. Remember, again, from the knowledge level, that we know that, at least I argued, that LLMs are extremely suboptimal users of knowledge. Now, on the other hand, a system such as S2, which is slow, which may take many, many cycles, exploits knowledge available in a way closer to the ideal agent of Newell. Essentially, you can keep creating sub-goals and keep elaborating until there's a very high chance the relevant knowledge actually comes out. And also you can use inference so that you get the full benefit of the piece of knowledge. Again, many candidates with different properties are available for this. SOAR is one of them, and there are others. I happen to like SOAR and its modern versions, but everybody who's using a symbolic architecture with LLM is essentially doing something like that for their purposes. They're trying to find ways in which to exploit the knowledge available in an effective way. Such a deliberative architecture interacting with an LLM or a future descendant of it can give us the best of both the worlds, a fast generation of relevant, potentially interesting, often partial, possibly erroneous solution, which can then be deliberatively elaborated to a more optimal use of the knowledge in an LLM. In humans, S2 is implemented neurally, and there may be ways in which candidate S2s can be implemented subsymbolically. As far as I know, Newell was clearly open to it. But for AI, functionality is important, and there's no reason not to exploit the full power of symbolic architectures for the S2 part. Glad to see, actually, I'm not proposing it, there's a lot of work that is being done. And Bob told me, introduced me to quite a few interesting work in the stream in which this kind of S2-like architectures are working with LLMs. Of course, there are many research challenges in making this happen. Summary, LLMs are suggestive about concepts and their activations being a form of thinking that is non-linguistic, non-inferential, statistical, and associative, a modality common to higher animals, children, LLMs, and perhaps partly for adult humans. But with linguistically competent adults and LLMs, the concepts are richer, and so even statistical association can provide interesting results. But it's also, the LLMs also somewhat argue against encodingism, that everything needs to be encoded in certain kind of representation. And I think that's been a problem of systems like psych. The LLMs fall short of the ideal knowledge level agent because of the limits of statistical association and lack of assurance that relevant distal knowledge will be accessed, and a fuller use of all knowledge beyond statistical associations can be made. Deliberative architecture that works with LLM can give us the best of both the worlds. Okay.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I noticed in one of your slides you talked about distal knowledge and how LLMs as like a system one system, some distal knowledges can't be accessed at all.
No, I didn't say they can't be accessed at all, because of rare statistical association when the distal knowledge is not statistically highly associated, it will be missed.
So by missed, it's a statistical probability. It's just
So
not very probable that they'll be associated.
Potential contribution to the solution won't be available.
Okay. And I was just thinking about your sort of the dual of system 1 and system 2 and how you sort of fitted LLMs as part of system 1. And I was just thinking how maybe analogies and metaphors, how LLMs are capable of doing analogies and metaphors. And maybe I'm just a little bit confused if analogies and metaphors, if that's part of system 1 or system 2. And
Generation of analogies and metaphors is part of system 1, but exploiting it for actual problem solving, finding it the appropriateness of it, whether that would be the job of system 2.
so if you're brainstorming a bunch of ideas and you're trying to get statistically relevant ideas for a particular concept, for example, LLMs as a system 1 system, it would be able to generate a bunch of analogies and metaphors to help it in a chain of thought to brainstorm ideas.
Yes.
But a system 2, you're saying actually using that brainstormed information, that would be the role of system 2. Okay.
Yeah, because it's slower. It has to be elaborated, critiqued, and you have to keep cycling. So yeah, that's what I would think. Yes.
Okay. I mean, I have so much more to talk about that, but yeah, I would concede to other people if they have questions.
So I have a question for you,
Yeah.
Chandra. So you're talking about this dual theory with the system 1 and the system 2, and you seem to be advocating for the. It's okay. You seem to be advocating for a research program that takes a dual theory approach, where we're combining something, and we've seen many talks, and even my group is doing this, right?
I'm not the first one.
Combining LLMs and system 2, but I'm still not sure that that's the right way to do it. I guess I'm curious. I mean, you were saying it. I thought it was interesting to hear your comments about how people that are working on LLMs think that maybe we don't even need the symbolic stuff at all. So they're basically saying that we can just do system 1 and system 2 things within the LLM. I might make a similar argument that within SOAR, I'm just using that as the example that you were using. Maybe we could do it all too. Not sure that it has everything it needs, but I'm not sure that current LLMs in their current form have everything that they need. But I guess I'm just curious if you think that we have to combine these two paradigms, or do they need? I mean, is that just the easiest way to do it? Is it a theoretical argument you're making that we need both system 1 and system 2, and that we need a dual theory?
Yeah. Okay. So okay. Let me see what I think about that. Is that first of all, SOAR is a content-free system, so somebody has got to provide it content, right? Then this is where then many knowledge bases are potential. Somebody say, here's SOAR, here's my knowledge base, use it as a. Actually, it has to be production rule based. Okay. So I think in that way it's restricted. Now somebody has to provide a knowledge base.
Maybe just one comment there is the way that I've been thinking about the integration between the system 1 and system 2 is that I almost think of the LLM as a knowledge base.
That's exactly right.
You're querying the knowledge base and getting something back, but I actually don't care whether it's an LLM. I mean, it could be it could be psych, could be some other system. Okay. And in my mind, once it comes out of the LLM, it's just all symbolic. For example, I'm not saying that.
No, you're right. I mean, that's right. That's a very good, interesting point. And I would myself, after looking at it for a while, I would say, no, it's the LLMs are offering an interesting alternative because a symbolic, remember I talked about encodingism, in which the idea that all world knowledge that we have can be in fact represented symbolically is probably not right. I think there is at least some of the evidence. Take, for example, knowledge that we have visually. Let me give you an example. Is that you were at a party last night and you saw Bill standing next to the wine table and and talking across the room to Stu. And the next day, somebody asks you about was Stu closer to the wine table than Bill while they were talking. You don't retrieve it from your head. You actually have a diagrammatic, make a diagrammatic abstraction of your visual memory and then say, no, by far, no, Stu was much farther away. He was across the room. You know, that is not an extraction, that is not a retrieval of recorded memory. Or another example is that this is an example I use, a person is, you see, go out on the street and you see this person sitting on a branch of a tree close to the, and then using a saw and cutting the part of the limb that is close to the trunk of the tree, okay? And so, you know, you react and say, why, and your answer to that would not be that I'm extracting a piece of information in my head that people sitting on the branch of a tree shouldn't be cutting close to the thing. You know what I mean? There's no such knowledge. It is instead, you're taking the visual arrangement into account. You know, it's a much more complex piece in which your knowledge of the physics of the situation, and all this coming together. And the idea that all of it is going to be represented in one's head as a collection of symbolic propositions, and you're going to be, it seems implausible to me. In fact, again and again, I say the reason why psych hasn't made more headway, in my opinion, is that extreme commitment to encodingism, especially with respect to common sense knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's 2 questions online, and I want to
okay.
give Ernie and Ken the chance to talk. So go ahead, Ernie. I think hopefully we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I wanted to add, I missed a few minutes of your talk, so you may have addressed this, but presumably a lot of the LLM.
One thing. I have a hearing problem, so somebody might have to restate the question, but go ahead. Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Presumably a lot of the LLM enthusiasts would say that you can achieve S2 functionality, at least for textual-based issues, with chain of thought kinds of methodologies. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, exactly. I think chain of thought is an ad hoc way of imposing a it's a plan, so to speak, imposed on it. But for a general purpose problem solver, you can't constantly be asking for a chain of thought, because chain of thought itself should be generated at runtime in an open-ended problem. So in that sense, I agree with you. Chain of thought is an ad hoc S2 abstraction.
Okay, Ken.
Hi, Chandra. So interesting talk. I think I would take, there's several things I disagree with, but the thing that's the highest level bit, I think, is the mistake the psych folks made was not encodingism. There's a lot of work in psychology that suggests that encoding is ubiquitous. It happens even in perceptual material. Look at Bobby Klotchke's results, for example. There's amodal symbols built out of all sorts of things that you described as being nothing but concrete. But the key thing is that what we do a lot of is encode experience, and that we distill first principles knowledge slowly from encodings of experience. Now, our models of that, actually, which we've done models of human conceptual change, for example, that go through the same sequence of theories humans do, use symbolic models. They use qualitative representations to abstract away from the sensory data and into something that becomes a bridge to cognition. So I think that's a missing component in any kind of system 1, system 2 story. It's kind of orthogonal to that. It's, do you take experience seriously and the accumulation of experience from the world seriously?
Can I missed, I say sorry about that, Ken. I have a hearing problem. Go ahead, yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna try, Ken. I was reacting to your reaction. So I think the question you have, Ken, if I am saying this right, is that it's not about encodingism. It's more about the commitment to the encoding of the experiences. I'm not sure I quite got the
experience versus starting. If you take a hardcore old-fashioned symbolic view, then you think of symbolic as tied to logic and lots of first principles axioms,
Right.
versus symbolic as a representational medium that gets used to encode all sorts of everyday experience from which you distill, using mechanisms like analogical generalization, first principles material. So in other words, it's an experience-based story as opposed to
Yeah.
axiomatization story.
Okay, so all right, I see what you're saying. There is the encode. There are there is one version of encodingism, which is the original naive physics paper by McCarthy and Hayes, and things like that, in which you actually describe your common sense knowledge as a series of axioms about the physical world. You're contrasting that with another form of still symbolic representation, where experiences are encoded, and you make they're no longer first principle things you are arguing, you are reasoning with, but you're actually directly making use of representations of experiences. Am I approximately correct, Ken?
Yes, that's a lovely rephrasing.
Okay, well, thank you. Yes, okay. I have to think about that, whether that would solve my concern with encodingism. Yes, I mean, that's an interesting point. I have to, probably not, something tells me that probably there is still a little bug in that, at least with respect to what I'm trying to say, but I can't think about it right now. I mean, think of it right now. So, but thank you very much, yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Chandra.